My ex wants me back after wrongfully accusing me of cheating and then called me a worthless piece of shit 4 years ago. If you enjoy these crazy stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And hey, if you didn't like it, go ahead and hit dislike, I won't hold it against you. Let's get into it. 4 years ago, I, 27M, was in what I thought was a solid relationship with my ex-girlfriend, Sarah, 26F. We'd been together for 3 years, and things were great, or so I thought. We had our ups and downs, but we were planning a future together. Our families were close too. Her parents loved me, and my parents adored her. It felt like we were all one big, happy family. But then, out of nowhere, Sarah started acting distant. She'd accuse me of being too secretive with my phone. I wasn't. I just didn't like her scrolling through it, and would get mad if I hung out with friends without her. I tried to reassure her, but things only got worse. One night, Sarah dropped the bomb. She accused me of cheating on her with my coworker, Jess. I was floored. Jess and I were strictly professional. We didn't even hang out outside of work. But Sarah was convinced I was lying. She called me a worthless piece of shit and said I didn't deserve her. I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. Her parents took her side, saying they were disappointed in me and that I'd betrayed their trust. What hurt the most, though, was my own parents' reaction. Instead of having my back, they sided with Sarah. My mom said, "If she thinks you cheated, you must have done something to make her feel that way." My dad just shook his head and said, "I raised you better than this." They didn't even let me explain. It was like they'd already decided I was guilty. The breakup was messy. Sarah's mom called me to say I'd broken her daughter's heart, and my own mom chimed in, saying, "You need to take responsibility for your actions." I felt completely alone. My parents, who were supposed to support me, acted like I was some kind of monster. For months, I was a wreck. I couldn't believe the people I loved most, Sarah and my own family, could think so little of me. The months following the breakup were the darkest of my life. I was so in love with Sarah that her accusations and the way she cut me out of her life felt like a knife to the chest. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and spent most nights replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. I kept asking myself, how could someone who claimed to love me so much believe I was capable of cheating? The lack of support from my parents made it even worse. Every time I tried to talk to them about how I was feeling, they'd shut me down. My mom would say things like, "Maybe this is a lesson for you to be more honest in your relationships," and my dad would just give me this disappointed look that made me feel like I was nothing. I started avoiding them altogether, which only made me feel more isolated. My mental health took a nosedive, and it didn't take long for it to affect my job. I worked in sales, and my performance had always been solid. I was even up for a promotion before everything fell apart. But after the breakup, I couldn't focus. I'd zone out during meetings, miss deadlines, and my sales numbers plummeted. My boss pulled me aside a few times to ask if everything was okay, but I didn't know how to explain what I was going through without sounding like a complete mess. To cope, I started drinking. At first, it was just a beer or two after work to take the edge off. But soon, I was drinking every night, sometimes straight from the bottle. I'd wake up hungover, drag myself to work, and barely make it through the day. It became a vicious cycle. I drank to numb the pain, but the drinking only made things worse. Eventually, it caught up with me. I got called into a meeting with HR and my boss, and they let me go. They said it was performance-related, but I knew it was because I'd become a shell of the person I used to be. Losing my job felt like the final blow. I'd already lost Sarah, my parents' respect, and now my career. I hit rock bottom. For weeks, I barely left my apartment. I lived off savings and delivery food, and the only people I talked to were the cashiers at the corner store and my best friend, Jake. Jake had been my ride or die since college, and he was the only one who didn't judge me for falling apart. He'd show up at my place with groceries, help me clean up, and just sit with me when I couldn't bring myself to talk. When my savings started running out, Jake stepped up in a way I'll never forget. He lent me money to cover rent and bills, no questions asked. He even helped me update my resume and apply for jobs, even though I was in no state to work. "You're not alone in this," he'd say. "I've got your back." It took me a long time to crawl out of the hole I was in, but Jake's unwavering support gave me the strength to keep going. After months of applying and interviewing, I finally landed a job in another state. It wasn't glamorous, just an entry-level position at a small marketing firm, but it was a fresh start. I packed up my apartment, said goodbye to Jake, who hugged me and told me to stop being a stranger, and moved across the country. The new job kept me busy, but I still felt this gnawing emptiness. I didn't want to fall back into old habits, so I started looking for ways to fill the void. That's when I stumbled into the world of day trading. At first, it was just a curiosity, something to distract me during my downtime. I'd spend hours after work researching stocks, watching YouTube tutorials, and reading forums. I was fascinated by the idea of being in control of my own financial destiny, especially after losing so much. I started small, using a fraction of my paycheck to trade. There were some brutal losses early on. I remember one week where I blew through half my savings on a bad call, but I was determined to figure it out. I treated it like a second job, studying charts, analyzing trends, and learning from my mistakes. Slowly but surely, I started to see results. Over time, day trading became more than just a hobby, it became a passion. I loved the thrill of the market, the strategy behind every decision, and the freedom it gave me. By the end of my first year in the new state, I was making more from trading than I was from my actual job. It felt like I'd finally found something I was good at, something that gave me purpose again. But through it all, I never forgot about Jake. Every few months, I'd fly back to visit him. We'd grab beers, catch up, and laugh about how far I'd come since the days when he had to drag me out of bed and force me to eat. On one of those trips, I handed him an envelope with a check inside, enough to repay every penny he'd lent me, plus a little extra. Jake tried to refuse it at first, saying, "You don't owe me anything, man." But I insisted. "You saved my life," I told him. "This is the least I can do." He finally took it, but not without making me promise to keep visiting. "You're not allowed to disappear just because you're some fancy day trader now," he joked. While things were looking up in my career and friendships, my relationship with my family was still in shambles. After the breakup, my parents had completely cut me off. They saw me as a disgrace, someone who had ruined a good relationship and brought shame to the family. My mom stopped answering my calls, and my dad would only speak to me in clipped, formal tones when I tried to reach out. It was like they'd written me off entirely. I remember calling my mom once, hoping to share some good news about my new job. Instead, she coldly said, "Maybe if you'd put this much effort into your relationship with Sarah, you wouldn't be in this mess." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the silence that followed. My dad didn't even bother to pick up the phone anymore. For a while, I tried to fix things. I sent them emails, letters, even gifts on their birthdays, but they went unanswered. It felt like I was shouting into a void. Eventually, I stopped trying. I told myself I didn't need their approval, but deep down, it still hurt. Jake was the only family I had left, and I clung to his support like a lifeline. It was about a year after I'd moved away when I got the first message from Sarah's mom. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through my phone after a long day of trading, when her name popped up on my screen. My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard from her since the breakup, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. "Hi Jason, I know this is out of the blue, but I need to talk to you." It's important. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it. I'd spent so much time trying to move on, and I didn't want to reopen old wounds. But another part of me needed to know what she had to say. Eventually, I replied, "What's this about?" Her response came quickly. "It's about Sarah, and it's about you. I think you deserve to know the truth." We arranged to meet the next time I was back in town visiting Jake. I didn't tell him about the message. I wasn't sure how to explain it, even to him. When the day came, I was a nervous wreck. Sarah's mom had always been kind to me, but after the breakup, she'd sided with Sarah without hesitation. I didn't know what to expect. We met at a quiet cafe, and she got straight to the point. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling. "We all do. Sarah, me, her dad, we were wrong about you. And we're so sorry." I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath and began to explain. Over the next hour, she told me a story that turned everything I thought I knew about the breakup upside down. Sarah had been cheating on me. For months, her affair partner was a guy named Mark, someone she'd met through a mutual friend. Mark was charming, manipulative, and had a reputation for getting involved with women in relationships. He'd targeted Sarah, feeding her lies about me and convincing her that I was the one being unfaithful. According to Sarah's mom, Mark had been jealous of my relationship with Jess, even though it was strictly professional. He'd convinced Sarah that Jess and I were having an affair, and that's why she'd accused me. Sarah was so caught up in his lies, her mom said, tears in her eyes. She believed him when he told her you were the one cheating. She even started distancing herself from us because we tried to tell her she was wrong. But by the time she realized the truth, it was too late. "You were gone." She paused, her hands shaking as she sipped her coffee. And then, it got worse. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, Mark?" she said, her voice bitter. "He didn't just manipulate her emotionally. He took advantage of her financially too. Over the months they were together, he convinced Sarah to invest in some of his so-called business ventures. She gave him thousands of dollars, money she'd saved up for years. And then, just a few weeks after you two broke up, he disappeared. Cleaned out her accounts and vanished without a trace." I sat there, stunned. "She gave him money? How much?" "Almost $30,000, her mom said, her voice breaking. She was too ashamed to tell us at first. By the time she came clean, it was too late. He was gone, and there was no way to track him down." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah, who had accused me of being the liar, the cheater, the untrustworthy one, had been the one who'd been deceived. And not just emotionally, financially too. "She's been carrying this guilt for years," her mom continued. "Not just for what she did to you, but for what she let happen to herself. She didn't know how to face you. I'm here because I couldn't let this go on any longer. You didn't deserve what happened to you, and I'm so sorry we didn't believe you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was furious. Furious at Sarah for betraying me, furious at Mark for manipulating her, and furious at myself for not seeing the signs. But another part of me felt a strange sense of relief. For years, I'd blamed myself for the breakup, wondering what I could have done differently. Now, I finally had answers. After Sarah's mom left the cafe that day, I couldn't stop thinking about everything she'd told me. The image of Sarah, the woman I'd once loved, being manipulated and betrayed by Mark, haunted me. But what stuck with me even more was the idea of her downward spiral. How she'd gone from the confident, vibrant person I knew to someone who'd lost everything. Over the next few weeks, I pieced together more of the story, both from Sarah's mom and from mutual friends who'd stayed in touch with her. What I learned was heartbreaking. After Mark disappeared with her money, Sarah was left broken, emotionally, financially, and mentally. She'd lost not only her savings but also her sense of self-worth. The guilt of what she'd done to me, combined with the shame of being conned by Mark, ate away at her. She stopped going to work, stopped seeing friends, and basically shut herself off from the world. Her parents tried to help, but she pushed them away, too ashamed to face them. It wasn't long before Sarah started looking for ways to numb the pain. She turned to alcohol first, drinking alone in her apartment until she passed out. Then came the pills, prescription painkillers she'd gotten from a friend. They made her forget, at least for a little while, but they also made her reckless. That's when the men started coming into the picture. Sarah's mom told me that Sarah began dating again almost immediately after Mark left, but it wasn't the kind of dating that led to healthy relationships. She was looking for validation, for someone to tell her she was still desirable, still worthy of love. But instead of finding comfort, she found herself in a cycle of toxic relationships. The first guy was a bartender named Chris. He was charming and attentive at first, but it didn't take long for his true colors to show. He was controlling, jealous, and quick to anger. Sarah stayed with him longer than she should have, partly because she didn't want to be alone and partly because she felt like she deserved the treatment. "I ruined the best thing I ever had," she told a friend once, referring to our relationship. "Why should I expect anything better now?" When things finally ended with Chris, Sarah didn't take time to heal. She jumped straight into another relationship, this time with a guy named Ryan. Ryan was the opposite of Chris, laid back, easygoing, and seemingly harmless. But he was also emotionally unavailable, using Sarah for companionship without ever committing to her. Sarah didn't seem to care. She was just looking for someone to fill the void, even if it meant settling for less than she deserved. After Ryan came Derek, a divorced dad who seemed stable and kind on the surface. But Derek had his own issues. He was still hung up on his ex-wife and used Sarah as a rebound. When he eventually went back to his ex, Sarah was devastated. She'd convinced herself that Derek was different, that he could be the one to help her rebuild her life. His rejection sent her spiraling even further. By this point, Sarah's behavior had become self-destructive. She was drinking heavily, popping pills, and jumping from one short-lived relationship to the next. She'd lost her job, her apartment, and most of her friends. Her parents begged her to get help, but she refused. She was trapped in a cycle of shame and self-loathing, convinced that she didn't deserve happiness. The lowest point came when Sarah got involved with a guy named Tony. Tony was bad news, a known manipulator who preyed on vulnerable women. He convinced Sarah to lend him money, promising to pay her back with interest. Of course, he never did. When she confronted him, he turned on her, calling her names and blaming her for being too trusting. Sarah was too broken to fight back. She just walked away, feeling more worthless than ever. Around the same time I was settling into my new house, I met someone who would change my life in a different way. Her name was Emily, and she was everything Sarah wasn't. Kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in me as a person, not just as a partner. We met at a coffee shop near my house. I was there working on my laptop, analyzing stock charts, when she approached me. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. I looked up, startled. No, go ahead." We started talking, and I quickly realized she was different from anyone I'd ever met. She was smart, funny, and had a way of making me feel at ease. We talked for hours that first day, and by the time we left, I knew I wanted to see her again. Emily wasn't impressed by my success or the things I owned. She cared about who I was as a person, my values, my dreams, my struggles. She listened when I talked about the pain of my past, and she never judged me for it. Instead, she encouraged me to keep moving forward, to focus on the future instead of dwelling on what had happened. Being with Emily was like a breath of fresh air. She made me feel valued in a way I hadn't felt in years. With her, I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. I could be myself, flaws and all, and she loved me for it. One of the things I admired most about Emily was her ability to see the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. She had a way of gently pushing me to confront my insecurities without making me feel small. "You've been through so much," she said one night as we sat on my porch, watching the sunset. "But look at how far you've come. You're stronger than you think, Jason." Her words stayed with me, a quiet reminder that I was more than my past mistakes and heartbreaks. With Emily, I felt like I was finally building something real, a relationship based on trust, respect, and mutual support. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that was enough for me. As we grew closer, I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else. I told her about Sarah, about the betrayal and the pain, and about how I'd struggled to rebuild my life. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she held my hand and said, "You don't have to carry that alone anymore. I'm here for you." And she was, every step of the way. Emily wasn't just a partner, she was my teammate, my cheerleader, and my safe place. With her, I finally felt like I was home. As my life started to come together, I couldn't help but think about my family. The rift between us had been one of the hardest parts of the breakup. For years, I'd felt like they'd abandoned me when I needed them most. But as I grew stronger, I started to wonder if it was time to try to mend things. It was my mom who reached out first. She called me one evening, her voice hesitant. "Jason, it's me," she said. I just wanted to see how you're doing." I was stunned. It had been years since we'd spoken, and I wasn't sure how to respond. But something in her voice made me soften. "I'm doing okay, Mom," I said. "How are you?" We talked for a while, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually connecting. She told me how much she regretted the way they'd treated me after the breakup. "We were wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "We should have believed you. We should have been there for you." It was a hard conversation, but it was also cathartic. Over the next few weeks, my dad called too, and we started to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension and awkwardness, but we were trying. When I finally visited them for the first time in years, it was emotional. My mom hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Jason," she said. "I hope you can forgive us." I hugged her back, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I forgive you, Mom," I said. "I just want us to move forward." Update 1. 2 years into my engagement with Emily, I thought my life had finally settled into a rhythm of happiness and stability. Emily and I had built a life together, one filled with trust, laughter, and mutual respect. We'd bought a house, adopted a dog, and were planning our wedding. I'd even started to repair my relationship with my parents, who had come to adore Emily and welcomed her into the family with open arms. But just when I thought the past was firmly behind me, it came crashing back in the most unexpected way. It was a quiet Sunday evening. Emily was out running errands, and I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer it. Standing on my doorstep was Sarah. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It had been 4 years since I'd last seen her, and she looked different. The vibrant, confident woman I'd once loved was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and worn. Her hair was shorter, her eyes hollow, and there was a nervous energy about her that made me uneasy. "Jason," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, but another part, the part that still remembered the good times, felt a pang of pity. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" I asked, my voice tight. She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your time, but I need to explain. I need you to understand." I hesitated, then stepped aside. "You have 5 minutes." Sarah followed me into the living room, her eyes darting around as if she were taking in every detail of the life I'd built without her. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been following you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "On social media. I made fake accounts because I knew you'd block me if I used my real one. I needed to see how you were doing." I stared at her, stunned. "You've been stalking me?" "I know how it sounds," she said quickly, her face flushing. "But I couldn't help it. Every time I saw a picture of you and Emily, it killed me. You looked so happy, and I realized how much I messed up." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to tell her she had no right to barge back into my life after everything she'd done. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the Sarah I'd once loved, felt a flicker of sympathy. "Why are you here, Sarah?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. She looked down at her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Jason, for everything. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about us. I let Mark manipulate me, and I destroyed the best thing I ever had. I've spent the last 4 years trying to fix myself, but no matter what I do, I can't stop thinking about you." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Sarah, I'm engaged. I'm happy. You can't just show up here and expect me to drop everything because you're ready to apologize." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "But I had to try. I had to see if there was any chance you could forgive me." Before I could respond to Sarah's plea, the front door opened, and Emily walked in. She was carrying a couple of grocery bags, her face lighting up with a smile as she called out, "Honey, I'm home." "I got the..." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Sarah sitting on the couch. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion and curiosity. She set the bags down on the counter and crossed her arms, her gaze flicking between me and Sarah. "Jason?" she said, her voice calm but questioning. "What's going on?" Sarah stood up abruptly, her face pale. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her hands fidgeting nervously at her sides. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to intrude. I needed to talk to Jason." Emily's expression softened, but there was a quiet strength in her voice as she responded. "I see. And you are?" "This is Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "My ex." Emily nodded, her demeanor calm and composed. She extended a hand toward Sarah, her tone polite but firm. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm Emily, Jason's fiancée." Sarah stared at Emily's hand for a moment, her face twisting with a mix of emotions, hurt, jealousy, and something darker. She didn't take Emily's hand. Instead, she took a step back, her voice rising. "Nice to meet me? Are you serious? You think this is some kind of friendly introduction?" Emily lowered her hand, her expression remaining calm. "I'm not here to fight, Sarah. I just want to understand what's going on." "What's going on?" Sarah snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "What's going on is that you've stolen my life. You've taken everything that was supposed to be mine." Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't raise her voice. "Sarah, I'm not here to steal anything. Jason and I are building a life together. If you're here to apologize or make amends, that's one thing. But if you're here to cause trouble, I think it's best you leave." Sarah let out a bitter laugh, her face red with rage. "Oh, you're so perfect, aren't you? So calm, so reasonable. But you're just a rebound, Emily. A placeholder. Jason will never love you the way he loved me." I stepped forward, my voice firm. "Sarah, that's enough. You need to leave." But Sarah wasn't done. She turned to me, her eyes wild with anger. "You're really going to stand there and let her talk to me like that? After everything we had? After everything I've been through?" "Sarah, you need to calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't helping anyone." "Calm down?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the house. "You think I'm just going to walk away and let you two play house? You think I'm just going to disappear?" Emily stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Sarah, no one is asking you to disappear. But you don't get to come here and disrupt our lives. Jason and I are happy. We're getting married. If you care about him at all, you'll respect that." Sarah's face contorted with rage, and she lunged toward Emily, her hands balled into fists. "You bitch," she screamed. "You think you can just steal him from me? You think you can just—" I stepped between them, grabbing Sarah by the shoulders and holding her back. "Sarah, stop. This is insane." She struggled against me, tears streaming down her face. "Let me go. You don't understand. You don't know what she's doing to you." "Sarah, enough," I shouted, my voice firm. "You need to leave, now." For a moment, she froze, her chest heaving as she stared at me with a mix of anger and desperation. Then, with a sob, she turned and ran out the door, slamming it behind her. The days following Sarah's outburst were tense. Emily and I tried to move on, but it was clear that Sarah wasn't going to let go so easily. It started with a text message. Emily's phone buzzed late one evening while we were watching TV. She picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read the screen. "What is it?" I asked, noticing the change in her expression. Emily hesitated, then showed me the message. It was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakably Sarah's. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. You'll regret taking him from me." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I'll handle this." But Emily shook her head, her voice calm but firm. "No, Jason. This isn't your fault. Let's just block the number and see if it stops." We blocked the number, but the messages didn't stop. They came from different numbers, each one more aggressive than the last. "You're not as perfect as you pretend to be. He'll see through you eventually. You're just a placeholder. He'll never love you like he loved me. You think you're safe? Think again." Emily remained calm, but I could see the strain in her eyes. She didn't deserve this, none of it. The messages were bad enough, but things took a darker turn when Emily started noticing Sarah everywhere she went. It began with small things. Emily would come home from work and mention that she'd seen a car that looked like Sarah's parked near her office. Then she started noticing the same car following her on her way to the grocery store or the gym. One evening, Emily came home visibly shaken. "Jason," she said, her voice trembling. "I think Sarah's been following me." "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach twisting with dread. Emily took a deep breath. "I was at the coffee shop this afternoon, and I saw her sitting in her car across the street. She was just staring at me. When I left, she followed me for a few blocks before I lost her." I felt a surge of anger and fear. "That's it. We're calling the police." But Emily shook her head. "Not yet. We don't have proof. Let's just be careful for now." Over the next few weeks, Sarah's behavior became more brazen. Emily would find notes on her car windshield, written in Sarah's handwriting. "You can't hide from me. I'm always watching. You'll never be enough for him." One night, Emily woke up to the sound of someone banging on our front door. We both rushed downstairs, only to find Sarah standing on the porch, her eyes wild and her hair disheveled. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" I demanded, stepping in front of Emily to shield her. Sarah laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I just wanted to see how happy you two are. Isn't that what you keep telling me? That you're so happy together?" Emily stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Sarah, this has to stop. You're scaring me, and you're scaring Jason. If you don't leave us alone, we're going to have to involve the police." Sarah's face twisted with rage. "You think I care about the police? You think I care about anything except getting him back?" I stepped between them, my voice firm. "Sarah, you need to leave. Now. If you don't, I'm calling the police." For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me with a mix of anger and desperation. Then, with a sob, she turned and ran back to her car, peeling out of the driveway with a screech of tires. The final straw came a few days later. Emily was leaving work when she noticed Sarah's car parked across the street. She tried to ignore it, but as she walked to her car, Sarah got out and started following her. "Emily," Sarah called, her voice shrill. We need to talk. Emily quickened her pace, her heart pounding. Leave me alone, Sarah. But Sarah kept coming, her voice rising. You think you can just take him from me and get away with it? You think you're so perfect, but I know the truth. Emily reached her car and fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. Just as she got the door open, Sarah grabbed her arm, her nails digging into Emily's skin. Let go of me, Emily shouted, pulling away. Sarah's face was a mask of rage. You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret everything. Emily managed to get into her car and lock the doors, her hands trembling as she started the engine. Sarah pounded on the window, screaming obscenities, but Emily drove away, her heart racing. When Emily got home, she was visibly shaken. She told me what had happened, and I felt a surge of anger and fear. That's it, I said. We're calling the police. This time, Emily didn't argue. We filed a report, and the police issued a restraining order against Sarah. But even with the legal protection, the damage had been done. Emily was jumpy and anxious, constantly looking over her shoulder. I just don't understand, she said one night, her voice trembling. How could someone be so obsessed? I pulled her into a hug, feeling a mix of guilt and anger. I'm so sorry, Emily. None of this is your fault. We'll get through this together. Update 2. After the incident where Sarah physically confronted Emily outside her workplace, we knew we couldn't wait any longer. The threats, the stalking, and now the physical aggression had crossed every line. Emily and I decided it was time to take legal action. We went to the police station the next morning, armed with evidence. Screenshots of the threatening messages, photos of the notes left on Emily's car, and a detailed account of Sarah's escalating behavior, including the night she showed up at our house and the confrontation at Emily's workplace. The police took our report seriously and advised us to file for a restraining order. We filled out the necessary paperwork, detailing every instance of Sarah's harassment, and submitted it to the court. A hearing was scheduled within a week, and we were told to bring all our evidence and be prepared to testify. The day of the hearing was tense. Sarah showed up, looking disheveled and defiant. She tried to argue that she was just trying to talk, and that we were overreacting, but the judge wasn't convinced. Emily and I took the stand one after the other, calmly recounting the events and presenting our evidence. The messages, the notes, and even witness statements from Emily's co-workers who had seen Sarah lurking near her office painted a clear picture of harassment and intimidation. The judge listened carefully, occasionally asking questions for clarification. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she broke down, claiming she was just heartbroken and didn't mean to scare anyone. But the judge wasn't swayed by her emotional plea. In the end, the judge granted the restraining order, prohibiting Sarah from coming within 500 feet of Emily, me, or our home. She was also ordered to stop all communication, direct or indirect, and warned that any violation would result in immediate arrest. As we left the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Emily and I could finally breathe easier, but sadness that it had come to this. Sarah's obsession had turned her into someone I barely recognized, and while I hoped she'd get the help she needed, I knew our priority now was protecting the life Emily and I had built together. Final update. After the restraining order was issued, Sarah's life took a sharp downward turn. With no job, no savings, and no place to go, she was forced to move back in with her parents. It wasn't an ideal situation for any of them. Her parents, who had once adored her, were now worn down by years of her erratic behavior and poor decisions. They weren't happy about her moving back in, but they couldn't turn her away. After all, she was still their daughter. Sarah's return home was tense. Her parents tried to help her get back on her feet, but it was clear they were walking on eggshells around her. They encouraged her to seek therapy and find a job, but Sarah struggled to take those steps. Her reputation in our small town had been tarnished by her actions, and potential employers were hesitant to hire her. Every rejection seemed to push her further into despair. I heard bits and pieces about her through mutual acquaintances. She was applying for jobs but getting nowhere. She spent most of her days at home, isolated and withdrawn. Her parents tried to stay supportive, but it was clear they were at their wits' end. As much as Sarah had hurt me, and as much as her actions had terrified Emily, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for her. The Sarah I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone consumed by anger and regret. I didn't condone what she had done, but I also knew that her pain was real. I found myself wishing her well, even if it was from a distance. I hoped she would find the help she needed, that she would eventually heal and rebuild her life. Not for my sake, or even for Emily's, but for hers. Everyone deserves a chance to start over, and I hoped Sarah would find hers. Emily and I, meanwhile, focused on moving forward. We strengthened our bond, leaning on each other through the aftermath of Sarah's actions. We knew we couldn't control what Sarah did next, but we could control how we responded. And for us, that meant choosing to live our lives with kindness, resilience, and hope, for ourselves, and even for Sarah. If you thought that was crazy, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild stories. And if you didn't quite enjoy it, feel free to hit the dislike. Your feedback means a lot. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think, or share your own experiences. And don't forget to check out my other videos for more insane tales. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.